Debt is crushing Asia right now. Trillions owed, economies breaking. These 10 countries are drowning in numbers they can't pay back. 10. Thailand. It might surprise you, but Thailand is quietly slipping into a debt problem that's getting harder to ignore. By the year 2025, their debt is expected to hit 65% of their gross domestic product. That's not small for a country trying to maintain economic balance. What's behind this? The government has been borrowing heavily to try and breathe life into a sluggish economy. But sometimes, even good intentions can dig a deep financial hole. To keep businesses afloat and citizens spending, Thailand rolled out big stimulus packages. At first glance, these moves seemed like the right thing to do. They pumped money into the economy, aiming to revive momentum after years of slow growth. But here's the catch: those funds didn't come from a surplus. They came from loans, and each new bailout added weight to the country's financial shoulders. For many experts, it's like putting out a fire with gasoline. You might stop the flames briefly, but risk making things worse. The real red flag, though, is what's happening in Thai households. Families are drowning in personal debt from credit cards to home loans, and it's hurting their ability to spend. With people tightening their belts, the economy struggles to grow. So, the government steps in again with more borrowing. It's a vicious cycle. And if Thailand doesn't find a way to fix it soon, that 65% might just be the beginning of something bigger. 9. China. Unlike other countries slowly falling into debt, China's story is a mix of ambition and pressure. By 2025, their debt is expected to rise to 88% of their gross domestic product. That's a huge number, especially for a country that wants to lead the global economy. What pushed them here? Part of the answer lies in how much they've spent to build cities, roads, and railways, everything to keep growth going. But there's a fine line between investment and overextension, and China's now walking it. China didn't waste time when it came to progress. Giant infrastructure projects, new airports, bullet trains, smart cities sprouted across the country like mushrooms after rain. But this boom came with a big price tag. Many of these projects were financed through loans, adding layer after layer to the country's debt. And when growth slowed down, the debts stayed. Some of those shiny roads now lead to what experts call ghost cities, where the lights are on but no one lives there. Behind the scenes, a bigger problem brews with China's local governments. They've taken on huge amounts of debt, often hidden in unofficial records. To fund their regions, they borrowed from state banks and created local investment vehicles, basically shell companies for borrowing. It was a short-term fix for a long-term issue. Now, these hidden debts are surfacing, threatening the country's financial stability. If not addressed, they could shake China's economic future and ripple far beyond Asia. 8. Pakistan. Let's shift the spotlight to a country where money problems are deeply tied to politics, survival, and basic services. Pakistan. By 2025, its debt is projected to hit 71% of the economy. That might not sound alarming at first, but for a country already struggling with inflation, unemployment, and poverty, it's serious. The government's spending more than it earns, and that gap is filled with borrowed money. Every year, the hole grows deeper. The worst part, ordinary people feel the weight every single day. It starts with fiscal deficits. Pakistan often spends billions more than it brings in through taxes and trade. That imbalance leads to constant borrowing just to keep basic systems running. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure, all of them rely on borrowed funds. The risk? If lenders pull back or demand higher interest, the whole system could collapse like a house of cards. For many Filipinos watching from afar, it's a reminder of how fragile public finances can be when leaders don't plan for the long term. One of Pakistan's biggest financial headaches is its energy sector. The country owes billions to power companies because of what's called circular debt. Simply put, the government doesn't pay electricity producers on time, Those companies can't pay fuel suppliers, and the cycle continues. This means frequent blackouts, frustrated citizens, and a debt trap that's tough to escape. If the country doesn't fix its energy model soon, the lights might go out not just in homes, but on its economic future too. 7. India. India's story is one of bold ambition. As one of Asia's fastest-moving economies, it has never been shy about big plans from smart cities to cutting-edge transport systems. But rapid growth has a price. By 2025, India's debt is expected to climb to 83% of its total economy. The reason? A mix of aggressive development goals and long-standing financial challenges. The country's leaders are chasing transformation, but they're borrowing heavily to make it happen. To build a stronger future, India has been pumping funds into infrastructure, technology, and public services. These are the kinds of investments that promise long-term gains. But getting there requires patience and money that India doesn't always have in its pocket. So it borrows. Highways, metros, digital systems, they're impressive, but the loans behind them are stacking up. Filipinos watching from afar know this feeling building big comes with big bills. Another part of the debt story lies in how India manages its finances. While it brings in solid income through taxes and exports, it still spends more than it earns. That gap is where borrowing steps in year after year, and though these efforts might lift the economy in the long run, the short-term cost is rising fast. India stands at a crossroads. Either tighten its belt or find smarter ways to grow without leaning so hard on debt. 6. Sri Lanka. Imagine being stuck in a hole so deep that every time you try to climb out, the ground gives way beneath you. That's where Sri Lanka finds itself today. By 2025, the country's debt is projected to hit nearly 78% of its economy. This isn't just about numbers. It's about a nation trying to stay afloat while its finances crumble. The pressure from unpaid loans is crushing, and every delay in repayment only makes things worse. The result? A spiral that seems almost impossible to escape. For years, Sri Lanka borrowed heavily to fund development projects and government operations. The money flowed, but not always wisely. Roads were built, ports were expanded, but the returns never came fast enough. Soon, bills piled up and lenders demanded payments the country couldn't afford. It was like building a castle on borrowed sand. It looked strong, but had no solid foundation. Now, every move the government makes is a balancing act between survival and collapse. To avoid total disaster, Sri Lanka turned to the International Monetary Fund for help. With that came strict conditions: spending cuts, economic reforms, and tighter controls. These changes are painful, especially for ordinary people who already struggle with high prices and job losses. But without them, the debt trap only tightens. For Filipinos watching, it's a powerful reminder. Borrowing can build, but it can also bury if not handled with care. 5. Laos, small but ambitious, Laos has been dreaming big, building bridges, dams, and roads to modernize its economy. But by 2025, its debt is expected to reach nearly 77% of its economic output. That's a heavy load for a nation with limited income sources. Much of the borrowing came from foreign lenders, attracted by Laos's promise of becoming Southeast Asia's next energy hub. The problem? Ambition ran faster than reality. And now, the country's struggling to pay the bill. A lot of money went into hydroelectric projects. Laos wanted to turn its rivers into power, literally hoping to sell electricity to its neighbors. But these massive developments were expensive and slow to deliver returns. While the country waits for income to flow in, the interest on loans keeps rising, and that has placed enormous pressure on the government's budget. Filipinos, familiar with projects that take years to complete, can understand how frustrating this situation must be for the people of Laos. To make things worse, the value of the local currency has been sinking. That means paying back debts in dollars or other foreign money costs more and more each month. What started as a growth strategy is now a daily financial battle. With limited reserves and shrinking purchasing power, Laos finds itself stuck between global lenders and local needs. Unless bold and smart moves are made soon, the country risks being buried under the weight of its own plans. 4. Maldives. There's a price to living in paradise, and for the Maldives, that price is debt. By 2025, the island nation's debt is projected to soar to 125% of its economy. That's a massive burden for a country with only a few main sources of income. Its economy relies heavily on tourism, but when visitor numbers drop, the government's earnings follow. To keep services running and projects alive, they turn to loans. But now, those loans are demanding repayment. The Maldives has always sold its image as a luxury getaway, attracting travelers from around the globe. But when the flow of tourists slowed down, the country's economy took a direct hit. Resorts sat empty, airports quiet, and businesses closed their doors. With revenue shrinking, the government started borrowing more not for expansion, but just to survive. The plan was to recover fast, but debt piled up faster than the tourists returned. That's how Paradise fell into financial pressure. As the situation became more serious, the Maldives had to ask for help from larger neighbors. Countries like India stepped in with financial aid and bailouts to keep things from collapsing. But bailouts are not free passes, they come with expectations and future repayments. Now, the Maldives faces a tricky path forward: how to rebuild its economy while paying off massive debt. For Filipinos watching, it's a reminder that even the most beautiful places are not immune to ugly financial truths. 3. Singapore. Here's a twist in the story. Singapore, one of Asia's most admired economies, carries a debt load that might shock many. By 2025, its debt is expected to reach 173% of its total economy. But don't be fooled by the number alone. Unlike others on this list, Singapore's borrowing is part of a smart strategy. It's not about survival, it's about control. The country borrows not because it's desperate, but because it knows how to use debt as a tool. Singapore treats its debt like a business investment. The government issues bonds and uses the funds to fuel its own financial ecosystem. With this money, they grow their reserves, strengthen institutions, and deepen the local bond market. It's calculated and deliberate, every move planned to maintain long-term financial health. This model has earned them global respect. And even with that high number, Singapore stays stable, calm, and fully in charge. What makes Singapore stand out even more is its massive national reserves. These savings act like a safety net, giving the country breathing room if global markets shift. While others panic, Singapore adjusts. It's a lesson many nations could learn from. Borrowing isn't always bad. What matters is how you manage it. For Filipinos watching, it's inspiring to see a nation that plays the money game wisely and turns debt into strength, not weakness. 2. Japan. Few countries wear the weight of economic pressure quite like Japan. By 2025, its debt is projected to climb to a staggering 249% of its gross domestic product. That's more than double its entire economy. But this isn't a result of recklessness, it's the cost of decades spent trying to spark growth in a society getting older by the year. The government keeps spending to support citizens, but the bills are becoming too much. And now, even the world's third-largest economy is feeling the squeeze. One of the biggest reasons behind Japan's towering debt is its aging population. With more retirees than working-age citizens, the government has to pour billions into pensions, healthcare, and social support. That means fewer taxpayers and more people needing assistance, a hard equation to balance. It's not just about numbers. It's about caring for an entire generation. But that care has come at a high financial price, and the pressure on public funds keeps building. To keep its economy alive, Japan has relied on stimulus packages again and again. These short-term boosts injected cash into businesses and banks, but they weren't magic fixes. The result? Debt stacked up, while long-term growth stayed slow. Now, Japan is stuck trying to fund the future while still paying for the past. 4. Filipinos watching. It's a powerful lesson. Even the most advanced countries can run into deep financial trouble when time and demographics work against them. 1. Lebanon. When everything that can go wrong does go wrong, that's Lebanon's reality. By 2025, its debt is expected to hit nearly 150% of its entire economy. This isn't just a fiscal issue, it's a national emergency. Years of political chaos, corruption, and weak leadership have drained the country dry. People can't rely on public services, banks won't release their money, and trust in the system is shattered. It's a nation in survival mode. The roots of Lebanon's financial collapse go deep. Leaders mismanaged resources and ignored warnings, spending recklessly and failing to reform. They borrowed from international lenders, but instead of investing wisely, the money disappeared into black holes of inefficiency and greed. When the pressure became too much, the system cracked. Today, the country struggles just to pay its bills, and as time passes, the damage gets harder and more expensive to fix. Adding to the pain is the collapse of the Lebanese pound. With the currency losing value fast, prices have soared, and ordinary citizens have been pushed to the edge. Every loan taken in foreign currency now feels 10 times heavier. Families can't afford basics. Businesses are closing, and the hope of recovery feels distant. For Filipinos, Lebanon's story is a harsh reminder of what happens when those in power fail to protect their people from financial disaster. What do you think about the situation in these countries? Are we next, or are we learning from their mistakes? Comment where you're watching this from. We want to hear your thoughts. And if this video opened your eyes, check out our last one. 10 Asian countries with the most European visa approvals. It might just surprise you. Share this with someone who needs to understand how deep the debt crisis in Asia really is. This is information that shouldn't be ignored.